New numbers out today appear to signal a major boom in job growth across the U.S. as more Americans receive the coronavirus vaccine and start returning to work. The U.S. added 916,000 jobs last month, while the unemployment rate fell to 6%. These numbers are some of the strongest we've seen since last summer, and this all comes as more states ramp up vaccination efforts and work to fully reopen after a year of restrictions. So for more on this, we want to bring in White House economic advisor Jared Bernstein. Thank you so much for joining us. So first, I'll just get your, your take on these new jobs numbers. What do these figures indicate to you about the economy?
They indicate that the economy and the labor market in particular is coming back with some speed in March. As you mentioned, the top line number, over 900,000 jobs, well over 700,000 in the private sector. The difference, of course, being government. And there we saw some nice job additions in the education sector for the public sector, so for state and local governments. We also saw something that hasn't been reported as much, and that's over 70% of private sector industries added employment last month. That's robust. That means it's not just a sector or two. I mean, last month we had a strong jobs report, but that was largely in restaurants. Now it's much more widespread. And as you suggested, we connect this to just a much more effective approach to producing and distributing the vaccine. That said, and I think this is equally important, we're far from out of the woods. 8.4 million jobs down from pre-crisis levels. Unemployment rate still highly elevated, above 9% for blacks, almost 8% for Hispanics. So much more work to do.
So let's talk about that ongoing work, Mr. Bernstein, on the president's $2 trillion infrastructure plan. How many jobs are we talking that could be created under this proposal?
If you go through the different categories of the proposal, and of course it's a very robust piece of work with lots of different initiatives, you're talking millions of jobs. For example, if you think about adding 500,000 charging stations, standing up an electric vehicle sector, trying to onshore what is essentially an industry that we'd love to grab global market share in, and that's battery production. You're talking about millions of jobs, and not just for a year or two. If you're talking about the rescue plan, that's a temporary measure that gets into the system, creates jobs, and gets out as we get to the other side of the crisis. What the jobs plan does, the American Jobs Plan, is much more lasting. So it's a continual job generator over at least a decade out, as far as we can see.
Of course, critics will point out that this is going to cost a lot of money, that there are conservatives that are concerned that to pay for this, hiking up corporate taxes is only going to have a bad effect on regular Americans as well. Even large corporations have buckled under the pandemic, in some cases having to lay people off. How do you respond to those critics?
Well, first of all, I think probably one of the key notions for listeners to understand is that these tax proposals do not hit lower, middle, or even upper middle income workers. In fact, they don't hit anyone whose income is below $400,000, which is a pretty high line in the sand there. And this has been something that President Biden has long stood for. Now, the kind of underlying theory behind the question is that if you cut corporate taxes, you ought to see a big investment boom, and if you raise them, it should push the other way. Well, President Trump cut corporate taxes significantly, and we saw nary a blip in corporate investment. So we're confident that the progressive tax increases that we're proposing, the revenue raisers, not only help create jobs by funding these kinds of productive infrastructure, clean energy, care economy ideas, but will simply lead to a situation where we're rewarding work, not wealth, and the corporate sector is paying its fair share.
Minority Leader Mitch McConnell has already said that Republicans will not vote for this infrastructure plan, but we know that there are Republicans who are interested in rebuilding America's crumbling infrastructure. So what issues, as an economist, would you suggest to the president might be ways to find some sort of compromise across the aisle where you could get a couple of Republicans or more that support this piece of legislation?
Well, I like that you asked me as an economist because while I get there's a political piece to your question as well, let me just start with the economics, which is that we rank 13th globally in infrastructure. That's the U.S. 13th in global infrastructure. We have a level of R&D that is far below what it needs to be globally competitive. Our roads, our bridges are in ill repair. Civil engineers give us a grade of C- or D in many of these sectors. So if we want to be a more productive economy, we've got to make these investments. If we want to be a clean energy economy, we've got to make these investments. If we want to have caretakers be able to enter the job market, we have to make those investments. Now, we need to pay for them over the longer term. This is something the president has long maintained. Permanent programs are much more sustainable if they have pay-fors. And so what we would say to our colleagues, and I'm sure what the president will say to his friends on the other side of the aisle, is that if you don't like our pay-fors, bring your own to the table. But simply saying we're either not going to do something or we're going to try to do permanent programs and not finance them, that's not the plan that we're putting forth.
The critics aren't just coming from the other side of the aisle, though. They're progressives that say, President Biden should go bigger. There should be more money for infrastructure, more money for climate change. So I guess my question to you is, how do you respond to those progressives that say this isn't even big enough? And is there a concern that, that the president may fail to win some progressive support on this as well?
I hear a lot of these arguments that say, your plan makes the economy run too hot, and your plan's going to shut down the economy, and your plan's too big, and your plan's too small. I don't know if that means we're threading some sort of needle. I think more substantively, the idea that the plan is, perfectly sized is not going to be one that everybody agrees with. You've got so many different stakeholders, and that's just the nature of politics and the nature of what different people are bringing to the table. I have a ton of respect for those who have tried to invest all kinds of personal political energy in trying to move this agenda. We think we're in a place that we can meet the demands of our investment needs and come up with a set of sensible, highly progressive pay-fors that touch no one below 400K and pay for the plan over 15 years. It's a very robust plan. I mean, this touches so many different sectors of the economy. It's extremely ambitious. Could it be more so? Certainly we'll have those arguments. But I think we very much like where we are in terms of the substance and magnitude of the plan.
So one thing I'm curious about is I understand the notion of raising taxes on corporations, but as you know, Mr. Bernstein, a lot of companies, they post record profits, and oftentimes they figure out tax loopholes. Sometimes they base themselves in other countries to avoid paying U.S. taxes altogether. So how important, and I don't know if the plan includes this, but what kind of suggestions are you putting in this plan that would, instead of raising taxes, which I understand is part of it, also figure out ways to reform corporate taxes? In other words, to just make the tax system a little better, because we've got to talk about the racial inequities in this country and the growing wealth gap. You mentioned it a little bit at the top between, for example, African Americans and Latinos and white Americans. I'm just curious if the plan addresses that.
In many different ways, and it's a very important question. So just starting with the end of your question, there are a couple of ways in which the plan really goes after racial inequities, both in terms of housing, pushing back on exclusionary zoning and a very creative idea that's in there, but also in terms of some of the infrastructure. The president aspires in this plan to replace 100% of the water pipes that include lead, because no child should have any exposure to lead in their water. And that is a disproportionate problem in communities of color. When you get to the tax code, again, you're exactly right. It's not enough to simply change the rates. You have to make sure that you're closing loopholes that facilitate tax avoidance. We have what's called a tax gap in this country that comes to hundreds of billions of dollars, and that's the difference between taxes owed and taxes paid. So that hole represents tax avoidance and evasion. Now, what this plan has in that regard is that it closes down, and it doesn't just do so by itself. We hold hands with other countries that are also victims of multinational corporations that shop around for the best tax haven. it shuts down those havens, and it makes it so that if you are a multinational corporation, you no longer can book your income in low-tax countries and your deductible expenses in high-tax countries. That's a trick called transfer pricing. That is why we have a new report showing that about 90 of our biggest corporations paid almost zero in taxes in recent years. That's because so many of them engage in these games. And a key part of this plan is closing down those international loopholes. Another key part is making sure that the IRS has the resources it needs to apply this enforcement. You know, it's been starved of funds by budgets that don't understand that when you give the IRS enforcement $1, they collect $6. So that's closing that tax gap, and it's a key part of our plan.
So, listen, before we let you go, CBS News reports that President Biden plans to unveil what some have called human infrastructure ideas next month in his American Family Plan proposal. Can you give us a little more insight into what that might be about?
Sure. Childcare, education, health care, paid leave. That side of the equation, you can call it, as you said, you can call it health and child care infrastructure. That's equally important to, of course, physical infrastructure. And the president talked about coming out with the American Families Plan in mid-April. So you know, we're equally excited to get that out there, and be happy to come back and talk about that when the opportunity presents itself.
Jared Bernstein, we will hold you to that, sir. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.